Tonight's story is continuing with Stories from God by Rainer Rilke. And so the next one in this book is called How Treason Came to Russia. My goodness. Remember, this was written in like 1904, so maybe there's some historical points in here. I have another friend here in the neighborhood. This is a fair-haired, lame man who has his chair, summer and winter, close by the window. He can look very young. In his listening face, there is often something boyish. But there are also days on which he ages, where the minutes pass over him like years, and suddenly he's an old man whose dim eyes have already almost let go of life. We have known each other long. At first, we always looked at each other. Later, we smiled involuntarily. For a whole year, we bowed. And since God knows when, we have been telling each other one thing and another, indiscriminately, just as it happens. Good morning, he called as I came by, his window still being open, out in the rich and quiet autumn. I have not seen you for a long time. Good morning, Ewald. I stepped up to his window as I always did in passing. I was away. Where have you been? He asked with impatient eyes. To Russia. Oh, so far. He leaned back and then, what kind of a country is it, Russia? Very large, isn't it? Yes, said I. It is large, and besides, was it a stupid question? Smiled Ewald, and he blushed. No, Ewald, on the contrary. You're asking what kind of country is it makes various things clear to me. For instance, how Russia is bounded. On the east, my friend threw in. I reflected, no. On the north, inquired the lame man. You see, I had an inspiration. The readings of maps have spoiled people. There, everything is flat and level. And when they have noted the 4 points of the compass, they think that's all. But a country is no map. It has mountains and precipices. It must touch against something both above and below. My friend considered. You are right. On what could Russia border in those two directions? Suddenly, the invalid looked like a boy. You've got it, I exclaimed. Perhaps on God? Yes, I confirmed, on God. So, my friend nodded in full understanding. Only then did certain doubts come to him. But is God a country? I don't think so, I replied, but in primitive languages, many things have the same name. There is probably a kingdom called God, and he who reigns over it is also called God. Simple peoples cannot always distinguish their country from their king. Both are great and good, terrible and great. I understand, the man at the window said slowly. And does one notice this proximity in Russia? One notices it all the time. The influences of God is very powerful. However much one may bring from Europe, all Western things are stones as soon as they are over the frontier. Now and again, precious stones, but only for the rich, the so-called educated classes, while from beyond, from the other kingdom, comes the bread on which the people live, and which they probably have in abundance. I hesitated. No, that is not the case. Certain circumstances make the imports from God difficult. I tried to divert him from this thought. But they have adopted many of the customs of that broad neighbor country. All the ceremony, for instance, you speak to the Tsar as you would to God. Oh, so you don't say Your Majesty? No, you call them both Little Father. And you kneel to them both as well? You throw yourself down before both of them, touch the earth with your forehead, and weep and say, I am a sinner, forgive me, Little Father. We, seeing that, call it slavery and most unworthy. I think differently about it. What does kneeling signify? It is meant to declare, I am full of reverence. But you can do that well enough by uncovering your head, say we. Well, yes, raising your hat, bowing. They are also, in a way, expressions of it. Abbreviations that have come about in those countries where there was not so much room that everybody could throw themselves on the ground. But abbreviations we soon use mechanically, no longer aware of their meaning. That is why it is good, where there is still room and time to do so, to write the gesture out in full, the whole beautiful and weighty word, reverence. Yes, if I could, I too would kneel down, mused the lame man. But in Russia, I continued after a pause, many other things too come from God. One feels that everything new is introduced by him, every garment, every dish, every virtue, and even every sin must first have his sanction before it can come into use. The sick man looked at me almost frightened. It is only a fairy tale I refer to, I hastened to reassure him, a so-called bailina, something that has been, as we would say. I would briefly tell you the substance of it. The title is How Treason Came to Russia. I leaned against the window, and the lame man closed his eyes, as he liked to do when a story was about to begin. The terrible Tsar Ivan wanted to lay tribute upon the neighboring princes and threatened them with a great war if they would not send gold to Moscow, the White City. The princes, after due deliberation, spoke as one man. We give you 3 riddles to solve. Come on the day we appoint to the east, to the white stone where we shall be gathered, and tell us the 3 answers. If they are correct, we will at once give you the 12 barrels of gold that you demand of us. At first, Tsar Ivan Borisovich reflected, but the many bells of his white city of Moscow disturbed him. So he called his wise men and counselors before him, and each one who could not answer the riddles he caused to be led out to the great red square where the church of Vasily the Naked was just being built, and simply beheaded. Thus occupied, time passed so quickly for him that he suddenly found himself on his way to the east, to the white stone by which the princes waited. To none of the 3 questions had he any answer, but the ride was long, and there was still always the possibility of meeting a wise man, for at that time many wise men were in flight, as all kings had the habit of ordering their heads cut off if they did not seem to them wise enough. Now, the Tsar did not happen to run across any such person, but one morning he saw an old bearded peasant who was building at a church. He had already gotten as far as the framework on the roof and was laying out the small laths. It seemed very odd that the old peasant should climb down from the church over and over again in order to fetch one by one the narrow laths which were piled below, instead of taking a lot at a time in his long caftan. In this way he had to climb up and down continually, and there seemed no prospect of his ever getting all those hundreds of laths in place. So the Tsar grew impatient. "Idiot!" he cried. That is how one usually addresses the peasants in Russia. "You ought to load yourself up well with your wood and then crawl up on the roof. That would be much simpler." The peasant, who was at that moment on the ground, stood still, shielded his eyes with his hand, and replied, "That you must leave to me, Tsar Ivan Vasilovich. Every man knows his own craft best. Nevertheless, as you happen to be riding by, I will tell you the answers to the 3 riddles, which you will have to know when you get to the white stone in the east, not at all far from here." And he urgently impressed the 3 answers in turn upon the Tsar's mind. The Tsar could hardly manage to thank him for astonishment. "What shall I give you in reward?" he asked at last. "Nothing," said the peasant, fetched another lath, and started up the ladder. "Stop," commanded the Tsar. "This will never do. You must wish for something." "Well, little father, since you so command, give me one of the 12 barrels of gold you will get from the princes of the East." "Good," the Tsar nodded. "I will give you a barrel of gold." Then he rode off quickly, lest he forget the answers again. Later, when the Tsar had returned from the East with the 12 barrels of gold, he shut himself up in Moscow, in his palace, in the heart of the 5-gated Kremlin, and he emptied one barrel after the other on the shining tiles of the hall, so that a veritable mountain of gold grew up that cast a great black shadow on the floor. In his forgetfulness, the Tsar had emptied the 12th casket also. He wanted to fill it up again, but it grieved him to have to take away so much gold from the glorious pile. In the night, he went down into the courtyard, scooped fine sand into the barrel until it was 3/4 full, crept softly back into his palace, laid gold over the sand, and next morning sent the cask by messenger to that part of the broad land of Russia where the old peasant was building his church. As he saw the messenger coming, the peasant came down from the roof, which was still far from finished, and called out, "You need come no nearer, my friend. Go back with your barrel, which is 3/4 full of sand and contains but one scant quarter of gold. I do not need it. Tell your master that up to now there has been no treason in Russia, and it is his own fault should he notice that he cannot rely on any man, for he has now shown the way of betrayal, and from century to century his example will find throughout Russia many imitators. I do not need the gold. I can live without gold. I did not expect gold from him, but truth and righteousness. But he has deceived me. Say that to your master, the terrible Tsar Ivan Vasilovich, who sits in his white city of Moscow with his evil conscience and in a golden dress." After riding for a while, the messenger looked back once more. The peasant and his church had vanished, and the piled laths no longer lay there. It was all empty, flat land. At that, the man tore back in terror to Moscow, stood breathlessly before the Tsar, and told him somewhat incoherently what had happened, and how the supposed peasant was no other than God himself. Could he have been right? My friend asked softly, when the last words of my story had died away. Perhaps, I replied, though you know the people are superstitious. But I must go now, Ewald. Oh, too bad, said the lame man heartily. Won't you tell me another story soon? Gladly, but under one condition. I stepped up to the window once more. Namely, asked Ewald in surprise, you must, when you get a chance, repeat them all to the children in the neighborhood. I begged. Oh, the children come to me so seldom now. I consoled him. They'll come all right. Evidently you have not felt like telling them anything of late, and perhaps you had nothing to tell, or too much. But if someone knows a real story, do you believe that can remain a secret? Never fear, it gets told around, especially among the children. Goodbye. With that, I left him. And the children heard the story on the self-same day. So this is our wonderful story. I think we might have time for one more. Let's see how long it's going to be. It's a little bit long. How long has it been?
10 minutes, maybe.
Okay, I think we'll go on then. This is called How Old Timofey Died Singing. What a pleasure it is to tell stories to a lame man. Healthy people are so changeable. They look at things now from this, now from that angle, and when you have been walking along with them on your right for an hour, they may suddenly answer you from your left, simply because it occurs to them that it is more polite and shows a more refined upbringing. With a lame man, one has not this to fear. His immobility makes him resemble things, with which indeed he fosters many intimacies, makes him, so to speak, a thing far superior to other things, a thing that listens not only with its silence, but also with its rare, quiet words and with its gentle, reverent feelings. I like best telling stories to my friend Ewald. As I was very glad from his daily window, he called to me, I must ask you something. Quickly I went up and greeted him. Where did you get that story that you told me last time? He begged me then. Out of a book? Yes, I answered sadly. The historians have kept it buried there since it died. That is not so very long ago. Only 100 years since it lived, quite carelessly for sure, on many lips. But the words that people use now, those heavy words one cannot sing, were its enemies and took from it one mouth after another, and so that in the end it lived most withdrawn and impoverished on one pair of dry lips, as on a miserable widow's portion. And there it died, leaving no heirs, and was, as I have already said, buried with all of the honors in a book where others of its family already lay. And it was very old when it died? Asked my friend, entering into the conceit. 400 or 500 years, I informed him truthfully. Some of its relations attained an even greater age. How without ever coming to rest in a book? Ewald wondered. I explained. So far as I know, they were traveling from mouth to mouth all the time. And did they never sleep? Oh, yes, rising from the singer's lips, they might stay now and then in some heart where it was warm and dark. But were people so quiet that songs could sleep in their hearts? Ewald seemed to me thoroughly incredulous. They must have been. It is said that they spoke less, danced dances of slowly growing intensity that had somehow soothing in their sway. And above all, they did not laugh loudly, as one not infrequently hears them do today, despite our general high state of culture. Ewald was on the point of asking another question, but he suppressed it and smiled. I ask and ask, but perhaps you are about to tell me a story. He looked at me expectantly. A story? I don't know. I only wanted to say that these songs were the heritage of certain families. One had taken it over and one passed it on, not quite untouched, with traces of daily use, yet still undamaged, like an old Bible that is handed down from father to son. A disinherited man differed from his brothers, who had come into their rights, in that he could not sing, or at least he knew only a small part of the songs of his father and grandfather, and lost it with the other songs, that great piece of experience which all these Bailini and Skaski represent to the people. Thus Igor Timofeyevich, for example, had married against the will of his father, old Timofey, a beautiful young wife, and had gone with her to Kiev, to the holy city, beside which the graves of the greatest martyrs of the Holy Orthodox Church are gathered. Father Timofey, who counted as the most adept singer within 10 days' journey, cursed his son and told his neighbors he was often convinced that he had never had such a son at all. Nevertheless, he grew dumb in rancor and sorrow, and he sent away all the young people who came crowding into his hut in order to become the heritors of the many songs that were locked up in the old man as in a dust-covered violin. Father, our little father, give us just one song or another. See, we will carry it into the villages, and you shall hear it in every farmyard as soon as evening comes and the cattle in the stables have quieted down. The old man, who sat continually on the stove, shook his head all day long. He no longer heard well, and as he never knew whether one of the lads, who was always hung listening around the house now, had not just asked for a song again, he would sign with his white head tremulously, no, 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 till he fell asleep, and even then a while in sleep. He would gladly have done as the young men asked. He himself was sorry that his dumb, dead dust was to lie upon these songs, perhaps quite soon now. But he had tried to teach one of them something. He would surely have had to remember his own Yeragushka, and then who knows what might have happened then? For only because in general he kept silence had no one seen him weep. It was there, the sobbing behind every word, and he always had to close his mouth very quickly and carefully, lest sometime it should come out too. Old Timofey had begun very early to teach his only son, Igor, certain songs. And as a boy of 15, Igor could already sing more and more correctly than all the grown-up youths in the village and the neighborhood. At the same time, the old man, mostly of a holiday when he was somewhat drunk, would say to the lad, "Yerogushka, my little dove, I have already taught you to sing many songs, many Bailini, and also the legends of the saints, one for every day almost. But as you know, I am the most accomplished singer of the whole government, and my father knew, so to speak, all the songs of the whole of Russia and all the Tatar songs as well, stories as well. You are still very young, and so I have not yet told you the most beautiful Bailini, in which the words are like icons and not at all to be compared with ordinary words. And you have not yet learned to sing those melodies that no man ever, were he Cossack or peasant, has been able to listen to without weeping." This Timofey repeated to his son every Sunday and on all of the many holidays of the Russian year, that is quite often, until Igor, after a violent scene with the old man, disappeared, simultaneously with the beautiful Ushkichka, the daughter of a poor peasant. In the 3rd year after this event, Timofey fell ill at the very time when one of those many pilgrimages that are always on their way to all parts of the vast empire to Kiev was about to start. His neighbor Osip came to see the sick man. "I am going with the pilgrims, Timofey Ivanovich. Permit me to embrace you before I go." Osip was no particular friend of this old man, but now that he was starting on this long journey, he found it absolutely necessary to take leave of him as a father. "I have sometimes offended you," he sobbed. "Forgive me, my little heart. It happened in drunkenness, and then one can't help it, as you know. Now I will pray for you and light a candle for you. Farewell, Timofey Ivanovich, my little father. Perhaps you will get well again, if God wills it, and then you will sing for us once more." Ah, yes, it is a long time since you have sung. What songs those were! The one about Duke Stepanovich, for example, do you think I have forgotten it? How stupid you are. I still know it perfectly. Of course, not like you. You simply knew how to sing it, one might admit. God had given you that. To another, he gives something else. To me, for example, the old man who was lying on the stove turned round with a groan and made a movement as though he would say something. It sounded very softly like Yegor's name. Perhaps he wanted to send him a message. But when Osip from the door asked, "Did you say something, Timofey Ivanovich?" he lay quite still again and only shook his white head gently. All the same, God knows how it happened. Hardly a year after Osip had gone away, Yegor quite unexpectedly returned. The aged man did not recognize him at once, for it was dark in the hut, and the old eyes were reluctant to take in a new, unfamiliar figure. But when Timofey heard the stranger's voice, he started and jumped down from the stove on his rickety old legs. Igor caught him, and they clasped each other in their arms. Timofey wept. The young man asked over and over, "Have you been ill a long time, father?" When the old man had regained a little composure, he crept back up onto his stove and inquired in a changed, a severe tone. And your wife? A pause. Igor spat. I have sent her away, you know, with a child. He was silent for a while. One day Osip comes to see me. Osip Ivanovich, said I. Yes, he answers. It is I. Your father is sick, Igor. He can no longer sing. It is all now silent in the village, as though it had no soul anymore. Our village. Nothing knocks, nothing stirs, no one weeps anymore. And there's no real reason to laugh either. I think it over. What's to be done? So I call my wife. Ustinika, said I must go home. No one else is singing there now. It is my turn. Father is sick. Good, said Ustinika. But I cannot take you with me, I explained. Father, you know, won't have you. And probably I shall not come back to you either, once I am there again and singing. Ustinika understands me. Well, God be with you. There are many pilgrims here now, and there'll be alms aplenty. God will help you, Igor. And so I went away. And now, Father, tell me all your songs. The rumor spread that Igor had come back and that old Timofei was singing again. But that autumn the wind went so violently through the village that none of those who passed by could tell for sure whether there really was singing in Timofei's house or not. And the door was not open to anyone who knocked. The two wanted to be alone. Igor sat on the edge of the stove on which his father lay, now and then bringing an ear close to the old man's lips, for he was indeed singing. His aged voice bore, somewhat bent and trembling, all his most beautiful songs to Igor, and Igor would sometimes sway his head or swing his hanging legs, quite as though he were already singing himself. This went on for many days. Timofei kept finding some still more beautiful song in his memory. Often at night he would wake his son, and while he gestured uncertainly with his withered, twitching hands, he would sing one little song, and then another, and yet another, till the lazy morning began to stir. Soon after singing the most beautiful, he died. He had often bitterly complained in his last days that he still carried a vast quantity of songs within him and had no time left to impart them to his son. He lay there with a furrowed brow, in intense and fearful recollection, and his lips trembled with expectancy. From time to time he would sit upright, sway his head to and fro for a while, move his lips, and at length some faint little song would come forth. But now, for the most part, he kept singing the same verses about Diok Stepanovich, which he particularly loved, and his son had to appear astonished and pretend he was hearing them for the first time, in order not to anger him. After old Timofei Ivanovich had died, the house in which his son now lived alone remained shut up for a time. Then, in the following spring, Igor Timofenovich, who now had quite a long beard, stepped out of his door, and began to walk about the village and sing. Later, he visited the neighboring villages too, and the peasants began to tell each other that Igor had become at least as accomplished a singer as his father, Timofei, for he knew a great number of grave and heroic songs, and all those melodies to which no man, were he Cossack or peasant, could listen without weeping. Besides, his voice is supposed to have had such a soft and sorrowful tone as had never been heard from any other singer. And this quality always appeared quite unexpectedly in the refrain, which they're therefore particularly moving in effect. So at least I have heard tell. Then he did not learn that tone from his father? Asked my friend Ewald after a while. No, I answered. It is not known how he came by it. I had already stepped away from the window, but the lame man moved again and called after me. Perhaps he was thinking of his wife and his child. Tell me, did he never send for them, his father being dead? No, I don't think so. At least he was alone later on when he died. It's so lovely. The oral tradition was also very strong in Tibet. Like this, they would go from village to village and all around Tibet. The most beautiful singers, they were so welcome. Not too long ago that I told the story of the Gesar of Ling and the oral tradition of his deeds was very, very important storytelling in Tibet. So this is very sweet and very reminiscent of that. Good night. Sleep well.